Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to sift through today's news, pull out the really key insights for you today. We got quite a mix from the Hindu Daily. We'll be looking at a pretty controversial constitution bill about removing ministers, then shifting to early childhood development in India, which is just so critical.
Absolutely. And after that?
After that, we get into an archaeological debate around the ASI, the hidden, really staggering costs of invasive species, battlefield decoys. That's fascinating stuff. And wrapping up with a look at the U.S. government actually taking a stake in intel, a real shift.
Quite a range. So the plan is to basically give you the core arguments, the surprising facts, make it all, digestible.
Exactly. Let's jump right in. First up, this Constitution 130th Amendment Bill 2025. Now, on the surface, it sounds pretty straightforward. The idea is if a minister, a chief minister, even the PM, is held in custody for 30 days straight for a crime where the maximum punishment is 5 years or more, they have to resign or they get removed. Right. And you can see the appeal, can't you? People want cleaner politics, higher standards. It definitely taps into that feeling.
But it's not quite that simple, is it?
No, not at all. What's interesting is that the bill tries to put into law something the Supreme Court has talked about morally for a long time. In cases like Esar Bommai or Manoj Narula, the court stressed constitutional morality. It warned about giving power to people facing serious criminal charges. But, and this is key, the court never actually mandated automatic removal just based on being detained. It always stopped short of that.
Okay. So the bill goes further than the court ever did.
Precisely. And that's where it starts to get, complicated. Because the big concern, the immediate red flag, is the presumption of innocence.
That foundational idea, innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly. Article 21 stuff. This bill seems to equate being arrested and detained, which can happen before any conviction, sometimes even before charges are formally framed with being unfit for office.
So it risks kind of short-circuiting the legal process.
You could certainly argue that. And then you look at the existing laws, like the Representation of the People Act, Section 8.3. That law only disqualifies a lawmaker, an MP or MLA, after they're actually convicted.
Right. I remember the Lily Thomas case at the court was very clear. Conviction means immediate disqualification, no grace, period.
Correct. So now you could have this really weird situation. A minister might get convicted, but technically stay on until they're disqualified under the RPA, while this new bill would force a different minister out just for being detained for 30 days. It's inconsistent and asymmetry.
And that inconsistency could put people off, good people.
Potentially, yes. Plus, there are practical worries. One of the articles talks about this potential revolving door issue.
What do you mean by that?
Well, imagine a chief minister is arrested, held for, say, 31 days, forced to resign under this bill. But then, maybe a week later, they get bail. What happens then? Are they immediately reinstated?
Oh, I see. You could have weeks of back and forth political chaos.
Exactly. Political instability, maybe without any real gain in actual accountability for you, the citizen.
And another source we looked at raised other points too, didn't it? Like undermining the PM or CM's authority to pick their own team.
Yes, that too. And the risk, especially in a federal system like India's, that a central government might use this power, let's say, vindictively against ministers in states run by opposition parties.
So the potential for misuse is there.
It's a concern. And it's interesting because the Election Commission itself actually proposed something different back in 2016.
Oh, what was their idea?
They suggested amending the RP Act, but their trigger wasn't arrest or detention. It was the framing of charges by a court for serious offenses.
Framing of charges, that's a step further down the legal road than just arrest.
A significant step, yes. It implies a judge has reviewed the evidence and found a prima facie case. So, look, the need for reform is clear. The ADR data is 46% of MPs in 2024 having declared criminal cases. That's up massively from 30% in 2009. The problem is real.
But maybe this bill is too blunt an instrument.
That's the argument. Perhaps something more nuanced. Linking removal to the framing of charges, like the EC suggested, or maybe an independent review, or even suspension instead of outright removal.
And one article also made the point that maybe this is tackling the symptom, not the disease.
Right. Addressing the effect ministers with cases rather than the cause, which is how people with serious charges get nominated and elected in the first place. The suggestion there was maybe the real change needs to come from political parties themselves, choosing not to field candidates with serious criminal records, even if they seem winnable.
That puts the onus back on the parties, doesn't it? So the big question for you listening is, where should the focus be? On laws after election or on the choices made before?
A crucial question indeed.
Okay, let's shift gears. Staying with India's future, but moving to, well, the very foundation,
Hmm.
early childhood development. There is this great analogy in one piece comparing the first 1,000 days of life to that critical window you have to leave home to catch a flight. Miss it, and you've missed it.
It's a powerful analogy because the science is just so compelling. By age 2, a child's brain is already about 80% of its adult weight. And the synapse development, those vital connections between brain cells, it peaks incredibly intensely during this period. It's foundational.
Foundational for everything that comes later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Higher cognitive functions, planning skills, emotional regulation. The groundwork is laid then. If that development is compromised early on, well, later progress is inherently limited. And critically, some nutritional deficiencies before age 3, they're simply irreversible. You can't fully catch up later.
Irreversible. That's wow. And there was specific research cited, wasn't there, from Valor?
Yes, a birth cohort study there. It found that iron deficiency in early childhood had a negative impact on things like verbal skills and cognitive processing speed later on, at age 5. Even expressive language before age 2 was affected. It shows that direct link.
And despite progress, India still faces a challenge here. The article mentions stunting rates.
Right. At the current pace of decline, India would only reach a 10% stunting prevalence by 2075. That's a long way off.
So the question posed was, can we double the pace, hit that target by 2047, the centenary of independence?
It's a huge ambition. And achieving it likely requires understanding that nutrition and cognitive stimulation have to go together. Research consistently shows that just providing food has a limited impact compared to programs that combine nutrition with stimulation, playing, talking, interacting.
Ah, so it's not just potion, it needs the Padhai B part too.
Exactly.
Huh.
That's why initiatives like the massive Integrated Child Development Services, the ICDS program, are so vital because they aim to do both. And newer programs like Poshan B, Padhai B, and the Navjitana framework with its tailored activities for caregivers are trying to really strengthen that stimulation aspect.
And we have this huge network, 1.4 million Angawadi centers. A real army, as the article put it.
A massive potential resource.
Mhm.
But the piece also highlighted areas for improvement, didn't it?
Yes. Things like better ICDS coverage, using technology more effectively, improving services in urban areas, strengthening pre-primary education, and actually measuring the well-being of these young children, not just physical metrics.
And zooming out, the bigger picture here is that investing in these early years, it's not just about individual kids' health, crucial as that is. It's fundamentally about enabling children, and especially women, to reach their full potential. It's about building human capital for the future, especially a future where automation might reduce jobs for lower-skilled workers. Those foundational cognitive skills become even more important.
So what's lost in those first 1,000 days really echoes through a lifetime and through society.
It truly does. It can never be fully regained.
Makes you think, doesn't it? How will India's current investment level in this area shape its future workforce, its entire society? High stakes indeed.
Okay, let's change direction again. Now we're digging into India's past and some controversy surrounding the institution meant to preserve it. The Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI. One article talks about a potential archaeological credibility crisis, and it zeroes in on the transfer of K. Amarnath Ramakrishna, the archaeologist who led the really significant Kiladi excavation in Tamil Nadu.
Yes, and Kiladi is central here. It's hard to overstate its importance. Started back in 2014, the initial phases uncovered thousands of artifacts around 7,500, and they pointed towards a really sophisticated urban society down south. Literate, seemingly secular, bridging a gap in our understanding between the Iron Age and the early historic period. Scholars started talking about a Vaigai Valley civilization. So naturally, it generated huge excitement, both academically and among the public.
Okay, so really important findings. But then came the controversy. Exactly. Ramakrishna's abrupt transfer in 2017. It was widely seen, rightly or wrongly, as an attempt to kind of downplay or sideline these findings, which perhaps didn't fit neatly into certain pre-existing narratives.
And it escalated.
It did. The ASI, under the central government, then claimed there were no significant findings, which seemed contradictory, and they stopped the third phase of digging. It became quite political. Eventually, the Madras High Court had to step in.
The court intervened.
Yes, and transfer the excavation site to the Tamil Nadu State Department of Archaeology. And since then, they've unearthed over 18,000 artifacts.
Wow, 18,000 more. That really underscores the significance the ASI initially seemed to dismiss.
It certainly raises questions about consistency. How can the same organization be so dismissive in one context, yet perhaps less rigorous in others? The article points out this contrast. While the government cited methodological rigor to justify its stance on Kilati, in other projects like Adichanulur and Sivagalai, also in Tamil Nadu, there were criticisms of neglect, delays in publishing significant Iron Age finds.
So inconsistency. And then there was the example from Rajasthan.
Right, where the ASI seemed, according to the author, to uncritically embrace certain narratives linking an ancient river channel to the mythical Saraswati River.
Hmm.
The author labels this pattern methodological nationalism, basically, a tendency to let a preferred, often state-sanctioned, historical narrative influence scientific methodology and interpretation.
And it's not just this author raising concerns. Other scholars were mentioned.
Yes, names like Ashish Avikuntak, Supriya Verma, Jayamenon, even Dilip Kumar Chakrabarty. They've criticized various issues over the years, things like arbitrary transfers, questions about scientific integrity in sensitive projects like Ayodhya, and the ASI sticking to older excavation methods like the Wheeler method when more advanced techniques are available.
So it sounds like a pattern of issues potentially systemic.
That's the argument. The article suggests the ASI's internal review processes might be too insular, too closed off, unlike many international counterparts that regularly publish detailed findings in peer-reviewed journals, which fosters transparency and academic debate.
So what's the proposed solution?
Well, the call is for comprehensive reform, structural, institutional, greater methodological rigor across the board, more financial autonomy, and critically, an openness to the diverse, plural nature of India's past.
It's a tough balance, isn't it, when history and archaeology get tangled up with politics and identity. How do institutions maintain impartiality? A question for you to ponder.
Definitely a complex challenge.
All right, moving on. Let's talk about something that affects environments and economies worldwide, but often flies under the radar. Invasive species. A new global study highlights that non-native plants are actually the biggest culprits economically, costing a mind-boggling $926 billion globally just between 1960 and 2022.
It's an astonishing figure, and it points to how much we've underestimated this problem overall. This study, published in Nature Ecology and Evolution, used a big database called InvaCost. Their conclusion: the total global cost from all invasive species is likely over $2.2 trillion. And crucially, they think previous estimates might have been off by a factor of 16. 16 times lower than the likely reality.
16 times. That's huge. And for you, the listener, that translates into a massive, often hidden economic burden everywhere.
Absolutely. Now, Europe had the highest cost in absolute dollar terms, around $1.5 trillion. But here's a really striking finding.
Go on.
India had the highest percentage discrepancy in reported management costs among all the countries they looked at.
Percentage discrepancy, what's that mean exactly?
It means the difference between the estimated total cost and the amount actually recorded as being spent on managing the problem was enormous in India's case. The figure cited was 1.16 billion%.
Billion. With a B. That sounds almost unbelievable. What does it imply?
It suggests a massive amount of hidden cost. Spending on managing invasive species in India might be happening, but it's just not being systematically recorded or reported in these global databases.
How would that be?
Well, the lead researcher, Brian Leung, offered a couple of possibilities. It could be due to limited resources for detailed tracking and reporting in India, or potentially a bias in the databases themselves, perhaps overlooking reports or data published in languages other than English or other major European languages.
That makes sense. But the issue is complex, right? We can't just say eradicate all non-native species.
No, absolutely not. Think about it. Many of our staple agricultural crops are non-native. Wheat, rice, potatoes, corn, they dominate our food systems, but originated elsewhere. And invasive species often hitch a ride through global trade, through the very movement of goods and organisms that we often desire for economic reasons.
So we're caught in a bind. We need to cut these massive economic losses from harmful invasives.
But we also rely on global trade, which facilitates their spread.
Ah,
And add another layer, climate change.
how does that fit in?
Well, to combat climate change, we need more vegetation, more planting. But some of those plants we introduce could themselves become invasive in new environments. It's a real balancing act.
So what's being done? Are there international efforts?
Yes, there are. Things like the Ballast Water Management Convention, aimed at stopping species spread through shipping, and regulations under the Convention on Biological Diversity. But this study, with its massive cost estimates and that huge discrepancy figure for India, really highlights a critical need.
Which is?
Better data. Much better data collection, tracking exactly what's being spent on management, and more robust reporting systems globally, but perhaps especially in countries like India, where the hidden costs seem so large.
It's a huge challenge, balancing trade, climate action, and controlling these astronomical hidden costs. Something for all of us to think about.
Indeed.
Okay, next up. Let's shift to the modern battlefield and the increasingly sophisticated art of deception. As weapon systems get smarter and deadlier, so do the methods used to trick them. We're talking about decoys. They're not just simple tricks anymore, they're strategic tools.
Absolutely. They're used to confuse enemy sensors, make them waste expensive ammunition on fakes, and crucially, buy time for your actual forces.
And one article highlighted India's reported use of some very advanced systems.
That's right. During something called Operation Sindoor, the Indian Air Force is believed, though it's not officially confirmed, to have used an AI-enabled decoy system. It's called the X-Guard Fiber Optic Towed Decoy, or FOTD, developed by Rafale in Israel, used on India's Rafale fighter jets.
And apparently it was pretty effective.
According to one source, a former U.S. F-15 pilot, yes, he reportedly called it the best instance of spoofing and deception ever seen. High praise, if true.
So how do these things work? X-Guard decoys.
Well, picture this. They're towed behind the fighter jet, maybe 100 meters back. They're lightweight, can be retracted and reused. The clever part is they mimic the fighter's signatures. Its radar cross-section, how it looks on radar, its Doppler velocity, its speed relative to the radar, even its spectral signature across different frequencies.
So they create a really convincing fake target.
It's exactly. Convincing enough, analysts believe that during that operation, Pakistani J-10C fighters may have struggled to tell the decoys apart from the real Rafales. This might have led them to fire missiles prematurely or claim they'd shot down more aircraft than they actually had. The decoys basically absorbed the attack.
Fascinating. And it's not just in the air, right? This happens on the ground and at sea, too.
Oh, yes. Ground forces have used dummy systems for ages. Think inflatable tanks that look real to spy planes, or decoys that emit heat to mimic engines or reflect radar. The article mentioned Russia using inflatable decoys from a company called Inflatech, and Ukraine deploying wooden mock-ups, even 3D-printed fakes, specifically to draw fire from Russian drones and missiles, making them waste their limited stocks.
Using cheap fakes to destroy expensive weapons. Smart.
Very. And even the Indian Army, just last year, put out a request for physical decoys of its T-90 tanks. These needed to replicate not just the look, but also the thermal and acoustic to the heat, and sound signatures.
And at sea.
Navies use layers of countermeasures. Things like chaff clouds and metallic strips to confuse radar, and more advanced stuff like the Nulka active missile decoy. Nulka is self-propelled. It moves away from the ship and actively mimics the ship's signature to lure incoming anti-ship missiles towards itself, away from the real target.
So across all domains, air, land, sea, these decoys are becoming essential.
Absolutely indispensable.
Yeah.
They offer a high degree of protection for a relatively low cost compared to the platforms they're shielding. It's about survival in a very lethal environment.
Makes you wonder, though, as AI gets even better on both sides, how will this game of deception evolve? That line between real and fake on the battlefield.
It's going to get blurrier and blurrier. A constant technological race.
Okay, let's circle back briefly to that Constitution Amendment bill, the one about removing ministers from office. There was another article looking at it specifically through the lens of, well, scrutiny and concerns.
Right, kind of reinforcing some of the points we touched on earlier. It reiterates the core proposal. Automatic removal after 30 days in custody for serious offenses.
And it really hammered home the difference between this proposal and existing law, didn't it?
Yes, very clearly. The Representation of the People Act, 1951, that's about disqualifying legislators, MPs, MLAs, and only upon conviction. Again, the Lily Thomas case cemented that. This bill is different. It targets ministers specifically, and the trigger is just detention, not conviction. It sets up a separate, arguably lower threshold for losing office if you're a minister.
And it brought up that Election Commission recommendation again.
It did, reminding us that the EC suggested barring candidates only after charges are framed by a court for those serious offenses, focusing on that judicial milestone, not just police action like arrest.
So what were the main potential problems highlighted in this second look?
Pretty much the ones we discussed. One, the risk of elected officials losing their job based purely on police action, well before any trial. Two, how it could undermine the prime minister's or chief minister's prerogative to choose their own cabinet members. And three, that potential for misuse, especially by a central government against ministers in opposition-ruled states, the vindictive action concern.
But The article also acknowledged the underlying problem, the malaise, it called it.
Yes, it didn't shy away from the issue of criminalization in politics. It cited those ADR stats again, 46% of MPs, 45% of MLAs with criminal cases, and the finding that candidates with criminal backgrounds often have a significantly higher chance of winning elections. That's a troubling reality.
So, while acknowledging the problem, the article suggested this bill might be the wrong solution.
Essentially, yes.
Mhm.
The argument was that maybe the bill focuses on the symptom rather than the root cause, and it circled back to that idea of political parties needing to exercise self-discipline, making the choice not to nominate candidates with serious criminal records simply because they seem winnable.
So, it leaves us with that same provocative thought. Is the best fix a new law for those already in power, or does real change start with the nomination choices made by parties before the votes are even cast?
A fundamental question about political reform.
All right, for our final topic, let's head over to the United States. There's a fascinating piece looking at what it calls a striking symbol of a new era in American economic policy. Specifically, the U.S. government taking a nearly 10% stake in the semiconductor giant, Intel.
Yes, and the author draws this comparison, calling it an uncomfortable resemblance to European state capitalism of the 1960s, which is quite a statement.
It is, because traditionally the U.S. hasn't really gone for that model, has it?
Not at all. For decades, Washington often looked down on Europe's dirigism, that state-directed approach to industry, seeing it as inefficient, interfering with the free market.
Yeah.
But now you have this deal. It involves converting funds that were already approved under the 2022 SHISH PS and Science Act money meant to boost domestic chip production.
And the way it came about sounds almost improvised.
Apparently so. President Trump reportedly just said to Intel something like, "I think you should pay us 10% of your company, roughly $10 billion worth." And they agreed. It sounds very transactional.
So why Intel? Why this company?
Well, Intel's been having a tough time. Once the undisputed leader, it's fallen behind rivals like TSMC in Taiwan, posting significant losses. So its relative weakness probably made it more open to this kind of government deal. The argument isn't that the government is picking a winner here. It's more like they're trying to prevent a national icon, a really critical part of the U.S. semiconductor supply chain, from fading into irrelevance. It's seen as strategically vital.
But the article asks, is this just repeating the mistakes of 1960s Europe, where state support often created uncompetitive companies?
That's the key question. But the piece points out a potential difference this time. The U.S. government's investment is structured to be passive and non-voting, meaning Washington won't get a board seat, won't have formal governance rights. The idea is to provide needed capital and a government stamp of approval, letting taxpayers potentially share in any recovery, but without the government directly meddling in how Intel is run, trying to avoid that state-coddled outcome.
A lighter touch then, but still risky.
Oh, definitely. That line between being a passive investor and an influential stakeholder could easily blur, couldn't it? Especially if Intel continues to struggle. Could a future administration resist the urge to intervene more directly? And now, the U.S. government's finances are tied to Intel's performance. It sets a precedent.
So what's driving this shift? If it's not ideology, what is it?
According to the article, it's largely driven by geopolitics. The intense technological competition with China, the need to secure domestic supply chains for critical technologies like semiconductors. It's described as a reluctant move, born out of perceived necessity rather than a sudden embrace of state capitalism as a philosophy.
So the old faith in the pure free market might be giving way to a more pragmatic, if maybe uncomfortable, industrial policy.
That seems to be the interpretation. And the big question for the U.S. and perhaps for you observing globally is, can they pull it off? Can the U.S. nurture a strategic industry using taxpayer money without falling into the traps that hampered similar efforts in Europe decades ago? Can it support without smothering?
A fascinating test case. Does this Intel deal mark a real, lasting change in American economic thinking? And what might that mean for global capitalism in key industries everywhere?
Lots to watch there.
Indeed. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive for today. Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting our Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.